Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see, Richard.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm Richard, and for the past few months, or let's say a little more than a year, I've had a pleasure of working together with Lily and Karen of MIT and Maya of ASU on an issue that affects not just my country, Ghana, but the entire globe. I'm talking about the issue of food waste. Today, I'll be sharing early results of our field experiment in the Ashanti regional capital called Kumasi in Ghana, where we tested two interesting behavioral interventions that could unlock solutions to this problem of food waste. Okay. Now look at this. The world produces more food than there are people to eat, and yet millions go hungry every day because they don't have enough food. What's the problem? One of the reasons is that a staggering 30% of all food produced globally is wasted. And the hospitality sector contributes a quarter of that. In sub-Saharan Africa, where hunger is most acute and pervasive at a rate of 55%, Ghana alone loses 3.2 million tons of food every year. This is valued at more than 64 billion US dollars. And we all know that even a fraction of that would change lives. Indeed, Ghana discards an average of 84 kilograms of food per capita, clearly higher than the world average of 74 kilograms. Now, bearing in mind the fact that, just a minute, it looks like, yes. Bearing in mind the fact that this problem, a major part of this problem can be attributed to food waste in restaurants, especially because restaurants are places where perfectly good food often meets the trash to make room for fresher food. We set out to work on finding a way of dealing with that issue. So what's our goal? We set ourselves to focus on a simple and yet critical question. The question that says, what behavioral intervention for restaurant staff is effective in reducing food waste? And the goal for this was to find a practical and low-cost solution at the restaurant level, which will not disrupt the work of the restaurant at the same time it won't create tension. And this is very important because a scalable solution of that nature in a resource-constrained environment like Ghana and sub-Saharan Africa could be a very important step towards dealing with the issue of food waste. Now, let me elaborate a little bit on the two interventions I just mentioned. Now, before that, so we came up with two interventions. One is a public interest intervention and the private interest intervention. So I want to elaborate on each of them. The public interest intervention usually encourages decision for group benefits above personal interest. And why did we choose that? It is because Ghana is a collectivist country where the desire to see the collective good, the community good, is about 9 out of 100. It's about 81 out of 100, whilst individualism is about 9 out of 100, according to the Hofstede individualism indicator. Apart from that, there has been a lot of studies that have shown that this type of intervention is effective in a wide range of contexts, from environment to conservation to so many others. And then we do not know we don't know of any study that has been done like this in our sub-Saharan context. Again, why would we choose to do private interest intervention? It's because economics just show us that humans are naturally self-focused. So if you're looking at this, the other one, why don't you look at the other two so that you see whether they are useful, even though we are in a collectivist environment. Now, I want to describe the experiment we did. First of all, I need to mention that we did an experiment here in Ghana, in second largest city of the country, a place where economics and commerce is so much booming across the whole of West Africa. It's one of the hubs, and it's a place where the hospitality industry is so well developed. So, together with the Ghana Tourism Authority, which regulates the activities of restaurants, we sampled willing 71 restaurants who were serving similar dishes. We gathered some administrative data on them so we can understand their characteristics. And then using stratification and K-mean method, we stratified them and assigned them randomly to these three groups. A control group made up of 22 of them, the self-interest group made up of 21, and 25 in the last group or in the second group. Now, I need to also mention that we did 6 weeks of data gathering. In the first 3 of those weeks, between mid-October and November last year, early November last year, we gathered the pre-intervention data, which made us understand what the situation was on the ground as baseline. We continued with another 3 weeks and gathered after we had given the intervention to understand this. Now, each restaurant was given clear instructions on how to collect the data, separate them, and make them ready for our trained research assistants to come and weigh with portable scales at fixed period agreed with the restaurants. After all these data had been gathered properly, we were able to get almost 3,000 observations, which we use difference in difference econometric techniques to analyze so as to get to the causality that is creating the changes that we are seeing. Now, a bit more about the nature of the intervention. So the intervention was in the form of posters like what you see on my screen. And one of them was emphasize community good, while the second one emphasized personal interest, especially through securing jobs for their individual selves. Now, after we had done that and ensured that they had pasted these sticker posters in vantage places in the restaurants, we ensured that every week for 2 times, we reinforce the messages of the respective interventions with text messages in the local Twi language and also in English. The posters were also done that same way. Now, the results were quite telling and very interesting. First of all, as you can see here, we gathered some data there. Some of the administrative data gave us this, and I want to jump that because of time. But one of the important things that we had to do before we even continued to work with our PID was to do a pairwise t-test to ensure that all the 3 groups were effectively or practically the same. And the data I show you here proves that based upon these characteristics that we measured before the intervention, and even the total waste which we compared with the various groups before the intervention, there was none of the comparisons that showed any significant differences. So we were able to go forward. Before the intervention, we also found out that 16 kilograms of food was wasted per day on average by the restaurants. This 16 came from almost 3 kilos from protein, 5 kilos from vegetables and fruits, and 8 kilos from carbohydrates. So let's take a first look at how our data appeared in this chart. You can see that almost all the groups were behaving in the same way. Before our intervention, this is the intervention point. This is the intervention point. Before that, almost all of them were behaving the same way. But just after the intervention, the treatment groups showed some decreases. Now, we needed to know how that looked like. So we plotted, we can see from this bar charts that whether it is total waste or the individual categories, the 3 categories of waste, the pattern was the same. That for the control, there wasn't any significant difference between before and after, but for the other 2, there were differences. And we needed to measure those differences to see whether they were significant. That is where we ran our regression analysis, DID, and this is the result we got. Our results showed that the public interest messages led to 1.4 kilo reduction per day in total waste, amounting to 9% reduction, whilst the private interest messaging was twice that, giving us about 19% reduction. Now, the same pattern for all categories of waste. However, the carbohydrate waste was only effective at 10% significance level or P level, and but it was 3 times more reduction for the private interest situation. One important thing is that, well, estimates show that any 15% reduction in food waste could feed 7 million people in Ghana. And incidentally, that is also the same number of people as at today who are known by the Ghana Statistical Service to be multidimensionally poor in our country. Now, I can give you a lot of quotes to give you some insight into why things went this way, but let me quote just one. One staff said, when we did one-on-one interview, the staff will do their best to reduce food waste, but the boss will take all the money and pocket it. This means that some way, somehow, the organization, that is the restaurant, and the individual's interests must collide somehow for it to be effective. Now, our work also threw up quite a few important insights. Insight number 1, both of the interventions were effective, even though Ghana is known to be a collectivist country, where we expected mainly public interest interventions to be effective. The interesting thing is that it wasn't only that private was effective, it was twice as effective, challenging our proposition for Ghana and also the conclusions of some existing studies. Okay. We could have so many reasons for what we saw. For example, why did the public interest intervention work? Number 1, it sits well with our kind of culture. Number 2, individuals trust that their public interest actions will be reciprocated by many other people in the public, thereby creating a cycle of positive behavior. So this is something that is very common in our country. Now, in terms of the, in quotes, anomalous kind of results we got with the private sector, we think that the economic situation in the country was the most important factor. And that is the reason why further work is going on to ensure that we understand more clearly what is going on. So what's our conclusion? Our study has shown clearly that whether it is private or public interest behavior intervention, we are able within Ghana to cut food waste by a good margin. Again, This demonstrates that harnessing human behavior, whether driven by a sense of shared responsibility or personal gain, can lead to significant reduction in food waste. This is not just a step forward in food management. It's a breakthrough that shows that when we target interventions very well, we could achieve measurable differences. With the right strategy, we can drive impactful change, reduce waste, and help secure a more sustainable future for communities in Ghana. And indeed, we all know, as we started from the beginning, that hunger is a global issue. Food waste is a global issue. And we show that a simple, practical, and low-cost intervention can make a significant dent in the food waste menace and its associated socioeconomic and environmental effects. This model can be exercised or replicated in many other countries with similar cultural and economic situations, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. At this point, I want to acknowledge USAID and all our partners, and also thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. We have at least now 2 questions. Olumor, I'm not sure if I can pronounce your name properly. Why don't you start first?
Thank you, and thank you, Richard, very much for the presentation. So it sounds like the intervention was an informational intervention targeted at the restaurant workers, so not the management, not the consumers. And so I'm curious about what are the concrete actions that workers themselves could take to reduce wastage? So is it that they're changing the way they do food preparation? Are they changing the portion sizes? Because my initial thinking was they are following kind of prescribed policies. It's, pretty clear what they need to do. It didn't seem like there was a lot of wiggle room or many levers that they could pull to reduce wastage. So I'm curious, did you give them, in addition to telling them, giving them this messaging that, seemed to appeal to kind of, their personal or societal values, did you give them instructions on things they could do, steps they could take? So basically, what is the mechanism of this effect? And it also seemed like both the public and private intervention, the wastage kind of rebounded after a couple of periods, and seemed similar to the control group again. So I'm curious about why you think that effect was temporary and also how it happened. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your question. It's a very important question. So the first part of your question, if I understand it clearly, you were asking what is the process that fuel reduction or no reduction in food waste? Am I correct? What's the process?
Exactly. So yeah, what are the workers themselves doing? Basically, like how did this happen? How did the wastage reduce?
Okay, so for this study, we were not focusing too much on that process. We were asking ourselves, the assumption is this: we think that if people are careless, for example, they will waste more food. But if they decide that wasting food will be beneficial to them, then all the other means they know, from refrigeration, from better portions, to any other use of technology, paying attention to what you buy from the market and what proportion of it you keep where and all that, they will do them. They have the capacity to do them. Nobody has inspired them to do it. So this kind of study is more of a behavioral one, more than the normal operational one. We can look at that in future study, and as I mentioned to you, that this work is still an ongoing work. We're not completed it yet. So thank you very much for that aspect, and we'll take a look at it. Now, the second part of your question, yes. Maya wants to say something?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. The second part of the question, I'm not sure if you said you were observing that getting to the latter part of the period, the treatment groups were becoming just like the control group. Is that what you said?
Oh. Yeah, maybe I misinterpreted, but that's what it looked like. It looked like they were rebounding after a few periods.
I'm afraid no. One of the most important assumption of difference in difference analysis is the common trend, situation. And we did all those checks and realized that the common trend was holding before and after. So that wasn't, I mean, sometimes when you look at the first view of a chart, you may think it's going up or it's going down until you run a further robustness check or some other analysis, and then you realize no, there's no statistical difference between the trends in trends between when the intervention wasn't there and when it came. So
yeah, thank you so much.
I don't know
Richard.
if I
Thank you
answered
very
your
much
question.
for yeah, well, actually, unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. We have to move to the second presentation. But just a quick, clarification for the question that you asked. First of all, in this field experiment setting, there is no way that we can see how, on what ground, labors, reduce the food wastage. We have some description for that. Maybe we can share the paper later with those people who are interested, but there is no way that we can study. I also see that Amir mentioned a very good point here. If the food that is saved from wastage is channeled to the public, this has not been promised by the researcher. So basically the answer is no, but thank you very much, because the way that you explain it also help us to explain further why there is a difference. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the second presentation.